Well, the McDonald's All-American roster is officially set, and Bronny James' inclusion surprised a lot of people. Was his selection a snub to other players, or did he deserve the nod?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your co-host, Andy Patton, and today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, we are talking McDonald's All-American game today. The rosters officially came out on the 24th of January. The game is set to take place on March 28th in Houston. It will be the 46th annual McDonald's All-American game, a staple for high school athletics and, of course, those who follow college basketball and want to know who the next great college basketball players are going to be. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about where these players came from, what schools they're going to, and kind of maybe which players maybe did not deserve a spot on the roster. Of course, every year there's always some consternation about this prospect got left off. This prospect shouldn't have made it. Ultimately, we know, and you can point to somebody like Matt Painter at Purdue, who kind of just ignores this type of event. They tend to recruit players outside the top 50, 75, 100. I believe Zach Edey was like outside the top 400 among recruited players, just a very different type of vibe there. So we know that this event ultimately doesn't necessarily give us a picture of here are the 25 best college basketball freshmen next season. That's not exactly how it works, but it does give us a good barometer for who are going to be the superstars or the studs or the guys to keep an eye on for next season. So first of all, I want to kind of break it down by conference. The SEC was the big winner out of this year's McDonald's All-American game. 6 players out of the 25 players set to participate, 24 players, set to participate in this year's event. 6 of them are going to SEC schools next year. Of course, 4 of those players are headed to join John Calipari and the Kentucky Wildcats in an incredible recruiting class for Coach Cal at Kentucky. Next up is 5 out of the Big 12 and the Pac-12, each of those conferences well represented at the McDonald's game this year. For the Big 12, 5 different schools. We spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about how absolutely dominant the Big 12 is. It's a murderer's row conference from top to bottom, and them having 5 different McDonald's All-Americans joining the conference next year, all at different schools, kind of gives a perfect indication of why that conference remains so top to bottom dominant. The Pac-12, similar situation, 5 players. 2 of them are at the University of Oregon. The other 3 are spaced out around the conference. Next up is the ACC. The ACC, 3 players joining from this McDonald's game, all of them going to Duke, which shows that North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, etc., Miami, the rest of the schools in the ACC did not add any All-Americans in the 2023 recruiting class. Big Ten is next. They have 2, both headed to Michigan State. And then the Big East rounds us out with 1 player joining the conference. Team by team, we kind of talked about some of them, a handful already. 4 players from Kentucky. That is the most. Next up, Duke, 3, the second most. Only 2 other schools have multiple players. Michigan State, of course, the only 2 representatives out of the Big Ten. And then Oregon, we talked about them, Kwame Evans, Mookie Cook, a really, really nice recruiting class for the Ducks and Dana Altman next year. Those are the only schools with multiple players represented at the McDonald's All-American game. The rest of the schools have at least one representative, just one representative of the G League. There is 1 player headed to the G League. Outside of that, UConn out of the Big East, Auburn, Kansas, Colorado. That's Cody Williams. He's going to be a fantastic player for Tad Boyle, the highest rated recruit in program history. Iowa State, Isaiah Collier is joining USC. Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Texas, Stanford, and Baylor round out our list. That gives you 23 out of 24 players. That's right. As there typically is, there usually seems to be 1 player who is still uncommitted who remains on the McDonald's All-American teams. Last year was Anthony Black, a very, very late commit to join Eric Musselman and the Arkansas Razorbacks. This year, this guy's player has a little bit more namesake. That is, of course, Bronny James, spoken about with Isaac Shade and Jason Jordan on a very recent episode of the Locked On College Basketball podcast, discussing Bronny James and his recruitment and his alleged top 3 list right now, which includes Oregon, Ohio State, and USC. There's reports that that is not necessarily a final 3 and that other schools could potentially jump into the mix for Bronny's services. But Bronny, of course, was in the news after the McDonald's All-American team came out. Certainly there are a lot of college basketball fans or basketball fans or just kind of casuals paying attention to the event who saw Bronny James's name, logically concluded that he is related to LeBron James, as his name doesn't really hide that fact, and thought, oh, wow, I'm sure he only made the team because of his dad. And that's not necessarily true. Now, there are arguments for other players, and we'll talk about them towards the end of the segment, who probably deserved to be McDonald's All-Americans. And I think you could make a reasonable argument that any of those 3 players could have been a reasonable selection over Bronny James. But Bronny is not some scrub. He's not some, should actually be in the, barely top 75 at the rankings, but is way higher because of his name. That's not the case. He's not a super dynamic scorer. He's more of a kind of fundamentally sound, high basketball IQ, good passer, but not necessarily a highlight reel playmaker type of guy. And I think that has kind of soured his reputation, his perception a little bit. Of course, being the son of an NBA legend, one of the greatest players to ever lace it up, that doesn't hurt either. That doesn't help either. And we've talked on this podcast and talked before about the sons of famous players, and it's a hard road. It's a hard road. Michael Jordan's kids didn't exactly pan out. Shaquille O'Neal's son Sharif obviously, managed to make it through college and into the G League, but it's a hard path. It's a hard path to be. Bronny is doing his absolute best. And you know what? He's better than he gets a lot of credit for. He's a good quality point guard. He's going to be a good, solid Power 5 capable basketball player when he gets to the next level. Having said that, there are a few players who are going to stand out for not being named to this team. The first, I think, most obvious name is Mikey Williams. Mikey Williams committed to join Penny Hardaway and the Memphis Tigers next year. When Mikey was a freshman in high school, he was the best freshman in the country. It would have been inconceivable at that time to say, hey, I bet that kid doesn't make an All-American. But you know what? Between your freshman year and your senior year of high school, there's a lot of growth, a lot of development, a lot of changes physically, mentally, all of that stuff. And while Mikey Williams is still a very, very good basketball player, still going to be an impactful player at Memphis, he just was pretty inconsistent for his next couple of years and never really honed in the skills that made him such an internet sensation, a social media sensation coming into his freshman year in high school. He just kind of never really built on that. And now he's still a great prospect, but it's not that shocking that his up and down sophomore and junior years were enough for him to not end up being selected as a McDonald's All-American. Next up, Oregon commit Jackson Shelstead. Look, Ducks fans don't get too much room to complain here. They got 2 All-Americans already. Mookie Cook is fantastic. Kwame Evans, fantastic. They might have a third if Bronny James ends up committing to Oregon. So I don't think that there's too much complaining here, but Jackson Shelstead, very, very good player. He representing Westland High School, playing in the Les Schwab Invitational. He was phenomenal in that tournament. They played Sierra Canyon. They played Bronny and the team over there, and he absolutely lit it up. They made a shocking run through the Les Schwab Invitational, player who probably deserved at least some heavy consideration for the McDonald's All-American team. You could make an argument that he maybe didn't deserve it, but he should definitely have been in that conversation. And then the final player is Texas commit A.J. Johnson. Johnson is the highest rated recruit per 24/7 Sports' recruiting rankings to have not made it onto a McDonald's All-American team. A very, very high-level combo guard. A lot of different schools interested in Johnson's services, recently committed to Texas, and recently held up his commitment to Texas despite the situation going on with Chris Beard. So it's going to be a really, really fun McDonald's All-American game, as it usually is. Once again, March 28th in Houston, a handful of days before they host the Final Four event. For those who got a couple of prospects or even just one prospect who are going to be in that event, it's always worth checking out. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the best team in the West Coast Conference is actually up for debate. More on that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here, and we are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sports book in America. That is FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to the point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Maybe you like Gonzaga's odds to beat the spread on the road against Portland on Saturday, or maybe you like St. Mary's to keep it up against BYU. Either way, bet comfortably on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So basketball fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports partner of the NFL. Well, I am joined now by Zach Farmer. Zach hosts the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. He's joining me to have a conversation that, quite honestly, I don't think we've had this conversation about the WCC in a really long time, something like 20 years. But we have to have a legitimate conversation about who the best team is in the West Coast Conference, because after narrowly escaping against USF, narrowly escaping against BYU, narrowly escaping against Santa Clara, the Zags finally got burned. All of the close contests caught up to them. They lost to LMU at home on Thursday. It is the first time the Zags have lost to the Lions at all since 2010, and the first time they've lost to the Lions in Spokane since 1991. That was Mark Few's first year as an assistant coach at Gonzaga. It has been a really long time since LMU came to Spokane and defeated the Zags, but they did. Gonzaga followed that up with a win on the road against Pacific. Pacific is a not top 200 KenPom team that was tied against the Zags at halftime. Gonzaga needed all of 38 points from Drew Timme in order to even secure a victory there. Meanwhile, St. Mary's has played basically all of the same teams that Gonzaga has played, and what they have done is quite a bit different. Blew out San Francisco, blew out Santa Clara, blew out LMU. They haven't played a close game. They've only played one close game in WCC play all season long. So looking at that, Zach, we have to ask the question, is Gonzaga even the best team in the WCC anymore, or is it St. Mary's?
I mean, if you look at the way they've both been playing right now, I don't think it's really much of a question. Mm-hmm. St. Mary's has been the better team over the last month and a half. This is a team that's now won 9 in a row. Just how good defensively St. Mary's has been, it's like, because they're taking good offensive teams like Santa Clara, as we talked about, just how the noise that they have made so far. Mm-hmm. They just absolutely crushed Santa Clara in the second half of that game last Saturday. St. Mary's in the top 10 in the net, in the top 10 in KenPom, and you're starting to see the reason why. And what's scary is that the offense is starting to come around for the Gaels. And that's something that for the last 2 years has always been kind of the question mark of, like, is this team going to be able to score enough? Mm-hmm. And they've really done that. You've started to see more out of Logan Johnson. Aiden Mahaney has been continued to be great throughout WCC play. In fact, he's been better in WCC play. I think that's a scary thing. Like, he just seems to be getting better night in, night out. And defensively, go back to that of, like, just look at the last few games. Like, they played Max Lewis, who is arguably an NBA prospect. He's going to be in that conversation. And then Brandon Pajemski 2 nights later, they held them to 5 and 7 points. Season low for Lewis and second lowest for Pajemski. Like, they're shutting down premier guards, premier talent in this league. This is a scary St. Mary's team, and Gonzaga is just not playing to the standard that we're just used to seeing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every advanced metric is pretty clear in who they're favoring here. You kind of mentioned a few of them. KenPom has St. Mary's 7th. They have Gonzaga 17th. The net rankings have St. Mary's 6th. Gonzaga shows up 12th there. Torvik's rankings, the biggest disparity. St. Mary's is all the way up at 5th in the Torvik rankings, and Gonzaga is down at 22nd. Of course, the AP poll doesn't quite reflect that yet. St. Mary's, after months of, or at least weeks of a lot of people wondering where the heck are the Gaels? Why are they not showing up in the top 25 despite every analytical model loving them? They have finally kind of earned their way into the AP poll at 22nd, but the Zags are still 14th. And certainly when you look at Gonzaga's resume, one thing that stands out that you don't see on St. Mary's resume is really marquee wins over top 25 opponents. St. Mary's played a good non-conference schedule in the sense that they didn't play a lot of gimme games. There weren't a lot of like sub 300 Ken Pom teams that they were playing. They played a lot of challenging games, but they didn't play a lot of elite teams. And the elite team that they did play was the Houston Cougars, and they played them extraordinarily well. And Houston's a top 5 team in the country, was number 1 until losing to Temple recently. But that was their best game. And of course they didn't win it, which, you know, there's no shame in losing that game necessarily. But I do think that when you look at St. Mary's record, that is something that stands out in contrast to Gonzaga, where they have this win over Alabama, which is a arguably the best non-conference win that pretty much any team in the country has. It's a monster win for Gonzaga, and it's really holding up a resume that, when you look a little closer after that, kind of falls apart a little bit. They got a win over Kentucky, but it's unclear how great of a win that necessarily is. They have a win over Xavier, which has aged exceptionally well, and that's a really nice victory for them. The big thing for Gonzaga is that outside of the LMU loss, the rest of their losses don't look all that bad. Purdue looked worse at the time than it does now. Texas has aged fairly well, as the Longhorns are a fantastic team. And then obviously Baylor just had themselves a really nice victory over Kansas. That kind of helps Gonzaga's case a little bit as well. But I'm curious, just kind of looking at those resumes, like St. Mary's has a lot of good wins as well. Do you think that the same issue that has plagued Gonzaga for years that is continuing to plague even Houston now, of just not getting enough respect because of name recognition, because they're not having as many opportunities to play top tier teams. Do you think that that's still kind of impacting the public perception of the Gaels? And what do you think, do they have to beat Gonzaga in order for that reputation to kind of get changed for them?
I think so. I think that still exists. And to be honest, it's probably a little bit fair. Again, you look at the best win being San Diego State for St. Mary's, like you don't have that top 15 win. You don't have that top 20 win. Like San Diego State, I think is hovering right around like 25 to 30 right now. So they're good. They're a very good win on a neutral site, but this is a St. Mary's team that hasn't really had to go on the road and play a real challenging opponent yet. That'll be the first time. Obviously, will be in Spokane at the end of February. And maybe a win against Gonzaga will help to shift that. I think that there is something to be said about waiting for like the quote legitimate win, or the quote like marquee win that St. Mary's needs to get the recognition nationwide, maybe. But again, I also think like this is a St. Mary's team that I don't know why, but every single year it does seem that like that everyone just hits a reset button thinking that St. Mary's is a bubble team every single year, where it was very clear, at least it was to me at the beginning of this year, like there wasn't a huge step down from St. Mary's from a year ago. And Randy Bennett keeps his teams in the conversation every single year. So, and that's the one thing that I think boggles my mind more than anything, is that he has put together teams that are in the conversation every single year. And to think that and I saw some pundits like weren't even considering St. Mary's to be in the tournament at the beginning of the year. Like, I don't know how you could even have that thought. Like, this is a team that's in the conversation all the time. But I do think for the national respect, they need to get the win against Gonzaga. And honestly, right now, I'd probably pick them to beat the Zags in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Well, that was the next question. Gonzaga and St. Mary's are going to play each other twice at minimum. They're probably, although who knows exactly, especially with how Gonzaga's been playing, they're probably going to meet in the WCC championship game. The WCC has a double bye for the top 2 seeds, so that makes it a little bit easier. So if we assume 3 matchups, one at home, one on the road, and one neutral, between these 2 teams between now and the NCAA tournament, if you're a betting man, who are you think St. Mary's takes 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3? Like it's kind of anybody's guess right now, right?
I mean, it really is anybody's guess right now. But I mean, based on the way the teams are playing right now, it would not shock me to see St. Mary's be not only the regular season champion, so that does mean probably beating Gonzaga at least once in the regular season, and then being the auto bid and being the tournament champion. This is the most flawed Gonzaga team I think we've seen in close to a decade, especially on the defensive end. And this is where St. Mary's has an opportunity to really kind of like take advantage of that and maybe be that auto bid for the first time in a long time. I think the last time was 2012 when the last time St. Mary's won the WCC tournament. So it's a long time coming for the Gaels. We know a lot has changed for Gonzaga in that time. Like obviously, like 2 national championship appearances, a couple Final Fours, all the streak of Sweet 16s. But if there's an opportunity, this would be it. I would definitely pick the Gaels to win the game in Moraga. I think I would still take the Zags in Spokane.
Mhm.
As far as Vegas, I think that'd be a toss up. That
Mhm.
would be, especially considering the Orleans Arena becomes Spokane South
Yeah.
every March. So
Mhm.
that one's always a pseudo road game, even
Mhm.
though it's like the quote neutral side, like that crowd
Yeah.
is 80% Zags. So
Yeah.
it's a tough task, but I think this is the greatest opportunity St. Mary's has to knock off Gonzaga in a long time.
Mhm. Well, I think it's safe to say that Gonzaga and St. Mary's both at least have a safety net with regards to making the NCAA tournament. Last year, the WCC was a 3-bid league. I want to talk to you, Zach, in the third segment about whether that's going to continue to be the case. 3-bid league, 4-bid league, 2-bid league, what we're talking about with the WCC coming up right after this. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, still here joined by Zach Farmer, the host of the unofficial WCC podcast. Zach, last year we saw a 3-bid WCC. It came to life for the first time without a Gonzaga, St. Mary's, BYU. We had another school in the conversation. That was, of course, Todd Golden and the San Francisco Dons. Golden is gone. He's at Florida. Jamari Bouye is gone. He's playing in the G League with the Miami Heat. And now we've seen San Francisco kind of take a little bit of a step back, but there are some other teams that have really kind of stepped up in a significant way. And I want to talk about a handful of teams in the conference on an individual basis. But before we do that, Zach, I just want to ask you more broadly. Do you think there's a chance that the WCC is once again a 3-bid league in 2023?
I mean, probably not. Like this,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the other teams in the conversation have too much work to do remaining. It took USF a net of in the 20s to get a 10 seed. And I think that's kind of what it says, because everyone else is down in the 80s right now. So I don't think there's a huge opportunity for them to get in. I think and we'll talk about a little bit about more detail, but yeah, I don't see this as a conference with any more than 2.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate how difficult it is for these mid-major schools to make a push. The Mountain West has a really strong contingent of teams this year, which the Mountain West and WCC always get compared, always get kind of thrown together, because there's really only so many spots for mid-major at-large bids. And if the Mountain West is soaking up a bunch of them, which this year they probably are, that's going to make things a little bit more complicated. I want to start with the team that does seem to have the best chance, at least in my opinion, of potentially making a run into the big dance. I do think it is probably going to take them winning the WCC tournament, or at the very least going to the WCC championship game. That's the Broncos of Santa Clara, 16-6 on the season right now. They're only 4-3 in conference play, though. Losses to St. Mary's and Gonzaga. 86th in Ken Pom, 80th in the net rankings. They still got at Gonzaga, at San Francisco, at BYU, all on the calendar. Your thoughts on this squad and really what it might take, if there is even a path for them to make the NCAA tournament?
Yeah. I mean, I like the Broncos. I like the Santa Clara team. I mean, it's hard not to like Brandon Pajemski and everything that he's done, but Carlos Stewart has been really good in this sophomore season. Keyshawn Justice has been great the last couple of weeks. So you have some senior leadership on this team that's really been able to help them kind of like carry through. But I don't see the at-large path for Santa Clara, short of you got to win in Spokane, which I think it'd be hard pressed to see Gonzaga losing twice at home in one season. Seeing them lose once was interesting enough. I don't see it happening more than twice, especially to a not St. Mary's team. But I think the only path for them is to win in Vegas. If they do get the win in Spokane, even if that happens, that maybe jumps them into the 60s, and that still means you have a lot of work to do. Yeah. You'd have to win out otherwise, I think, to even be in the conversation. So maybe that pushes them into the 50-ish range. But then you got to make a run in the tournament. I think their only path is to win it all in Vegas.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably going to be the sentiment that we come to for these other teams, but I still kind of want to take a look at where they might end up, even if it's not the NCAA tournament. 9-loss BYU team, they're not getting into the NCAA tournament unless they win the WCC outright. I think that's reasonable to say this is a team that's only 500 in West Coast Conference play so far this season. 83rd Ken Pom, but all the way down at 98 in the net right now. They do got St. Mary's twice. They got a road trip to Gonzaga. They got USF and Santa Clara. So got a lot of big games left for Mark Pope's squad. But I'm kind of curious, where you think this team's going to end up, because it's probably not going to be the NCAA tournament, and really kind of this team's about to go to the Big 12, and we're talking about a team that's 500 in WCC play right now. Like, are we in trouble right now if we're Mark Pope?
This BYU team, we knew going in was going to struggle offensively, and that's exactly what's happened. Yes, they had a really good showing against Gonzaga when they were in Provo, but outside of that, we really haven't seen that. We haven't seen them be able to travel well. This is a BYU team that just cannot get it going consistently on the offensive end. Jackson Robinson has had a really good night. He's had a nice couple of weeks. We've seen since Spencer Johnson has come back, they've been a little bit better on the offensive end, but there's still not that consistency that we're so used to seeing from a BYU offense this season. And as far as like a postseason, I honestly like this. I think it's going to be a struggle for them to get to an NIT. Where they are right now with the games they have left, yes, there's opportunities, but I don't favor them in any of those opportunities right now. They do have St. Mary's twice, and they have they're going to be hosting the Gaels on Saturday. But the way St. Mary's plays defense against that offense, like I just do not see that working out well. And we've seen like BYU is really struggling in their last go round in the WCC. Like it does seem like at the very least, like all the teams are kind of like putting their last stamp on the Cougars before they go out the door. I don't even know if they would take a CBI if it were offered to them. I don't see them as an NIT team right now. It's going to be a struggle for them going into the Big 12.
Absolutely. Yeah. The BYU matchup against St. Mary's just seems like St. Mary's strengths directly against BYU's weaknesses. That's going to be a tough matchup there. St. Mary's might only need to score about 60 or 65 in order to secure a victory in that one. I wanted to move on, talk about LMU, the team that did beat Gonzaga in a home game. They are 14-7 on the season, 4-3 in conference play, a team that was not necessarily expected to be all that good, was kind of in the middle of the pack conversation for the WCC, has stepped up in Stan Johnson's in this season under Stan Johnson, a team that lost Eli Scott last year to graduation and has almost seemed to kind of improve in some ways, just being able to space the floor a little bit more and kind of do some different things. Again, similar to BYU, they're just inside the top 90 in the net. They're 89th right there, 94th in KenPom. So I think a path to an at-large bid is probably off of the table. It would require absolute perfection and a lot of other things to fall the right direction for them. But this does look like a team that could at least potentially play in some kind of postseason tournament, which is a really nice feather on the cap of what has been a solid season for Stan Johnson and the Lions.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been such a pleasant surprise for LMU. The way they bounced back from a year ago, they were so banged up last year. Everything went wrong for them a year ago, especially after there was so much promise with year one and Stan Johnson. Getting the Gonzaga win was a huge feather in the cap for the program. I do think that this team, even though like the numbers are similar to BYU, I think this is a team that has a better shot to get to an NIT. I think they're still going to be on kind of like on the cusp on the outside of that line. I think it's going to be close for them to get an NIT bid, but I think the opportunities are there. They have an opportunity to get fat on a lot of the bottom half of the WCC in the next couple of weeks. Then they have Pepperdine, they have San Diego. I think they have Portland again. So there's opportunities for LMU to really start to pick up some wins and move up in the standings. And I think that this is a team that's capable, because I think they're probably I don't know if they're probably like a 4 or 5 seed in the WCC when all is said and done in Vegas. I do think that they're good enough to get to a semifinal. I think that they're talented enough, tough enough. And I think that's what we saw the last couple of weeks is LMU is a really tough team, really like mentally tough team, that they were able to go up into Spokane and beat the Zags when a lot of things didn't go right for them either. And even when they played St. Mary's the week before, I thought that they played really well against the Gaels, and just like that game could have gotten away from them, and it really didn't. They had it within 10, I think, with like 9 minutes left. So they at very least like kept it close, and St. Mary's wasn't able to completely run away from them. So this LMU team, I think, is going to have opportunities throughout the rest of conference play to really at least like build the resume up to maybe they're in the NIT conversation.
Final team I want to talk about with you, Zach, is the USF Dons. Again, a team that went to the NCAA tournament last year, lost a lot of talent from last year's roster. We mentioned Bouye. We mentioned, of course, their coach, Todd Golden. They also lost Juhan Misalski, a fantastic big man in the conference. This is a team that's not really in the NCAA tournament conversation, quite honestly. 9-loss team, only 3-5 in the WCC. But really what I want to talk about is like what we've thought of the regime change. Obviously, Chris Burleson taking over as the head coach. They still have Khalil Shabazz. They still have some nice pieces. Tyrell Roberts has been a nice piece in the guard room for them. But like, are we kind of down on this team? Are we pessimistic about them going forward, or is it just like, hey, they've kind of had a rough start this year, but there's still some nice pieces there?
Coming out of last year was going to be tough. I mean, they lost 4 starters. We knew that was going to be rough. Like you lose again. You mentioned Bouye, Masalski. You also lose Gabe Stefanini and Patrick Tape. Like you lost 4 starters out of that group, so there was a lot that they were going to have to replace. And USF always kind of like was able to kind of tread water on the WCC. Always was kind of like in that 4 or 5 range. Sometimes they'd slip up to 3. But the difference for them always was whether or not the low post, the interior presence was going to be there. And that is something that they've missed for the most part of this season. I don't think they've really they don't have that Juhan Misalski in the middle of that. And that really was a difference from a year ago. Like, because we saw 3 seasons ago, you have Bouye and Shabazz, but they were just missing that one piece. And the second they got Misalski, everything changed. They had that tough defensive presence, and they haven't had that level of a presence this year. And then when you don't have a Bouye, that's like as good as Ty Roberts has been, he's not Jamari Bouye.
Right.
I'm not down on USF really. I think that this was just going to be a rough year, a transitional year for them, not only on the coaching side, but just on the player side. Because I think what's really going to be the key for them is what happens going into next year. They can build on some of the pieces because you also still have a pretty senior heavy team even within this group. So what the Dons look like, I think a year ago will really be telling for the program moving forward.
All right, well, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much to Zach Farmer for joining the show, talking some WCC hoops. It's always appreciated. You can find the podcast wherever you already get podcasts, Locked On College Basketball. It's on Spotify, it's on Google, it's on Apple, it is on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big red subscribe button. Plenty more fun content coming your way later this week. For now, peace out.